Michel Franco is one of the most complete and daring filmmakers at work today. A writer, director, producer, and editor. He's been unafraid of tackling difficult subject matter, from forced underground pornography in his debut feature, Danielle and Anna, which played in Directors' Fortnight at Cannes in 2009, to bullying in After Lucia, which took the top prize in 2012's Cannes Uncertain Regards section. Difficult parent-child relationships and the laying bare of awkward family dynamics tested through difficult situations are at the core of a number of his films, including Through the Eyes, co-directed with his sister Victoria in 2014, April's Daughter, winner of the Uncertain Regard Jury Prize in Cannes in 2017, and Chronic, his English language debut, which won Franco the Best Screenplay Award at Cannes in 2015. His are bold, unflinching works with a singularity of vision that feels dynamic, important, and timely. There's a lean economy to his filmmaking, but it's matched by emotional weight and the construction of complex, nuanced characters marked by a moral ambiguity that seems all too rare in a world where too many are too keen to take sides. This year, his sixth film, New Order, premiered at the Venice Film Festival. It's perhaps less intimate than his previous works, but no less bold. An impressively original work, its narrative centres on the lavish festivities of a society wedding, brutally disrupted by protesters entering the home as a revolution rages on the city streets, with brutal consequences, and, as in his previous films, different perspectives at play. No other film more effectively embodied the unsettled ambience and the polarised extremes of 2020, quite like Michel Franco's New Order. Michel, this feels like a much bigger film than your earlier five works, a larger cast at the core, a busier handheld camera. Aesthetically, it does feel different to the intimacy that so characterised your previous films. Was this a very deliberate decision on your part?
Well, thanks, first of all, for that very nice introduction you made. I wanted to make a film that would study the social dimension on a big scale, that analyzes what's going on in a country, and that's very hard to imagine. It's hard to write because you have to put a lot into a certain, a limited amount of pages, but also then once you write it, okay, how are we gonna shoot this without a Hollywood budget? So the reason why it's handheld and why it begins with a montage that the opening sequence and every other decision and the, I don't know if it's a montage, but the compositions in the middle part of the movie where we show the aftermath with still compositions, everything was planned and made to serve the script. So it's a bigger movie and less intimate, as you were saying, but not because I was hungry to make an ambitious movie. I think when filmmakers say, I want to grow, I think that's a mistake. I think you should simply do what's, the next movie. And this, I had to do this, and this was, along with my cinematographer, who I have a close relationship with, we figured out this was the only way to make the movie, and it was quite hard.
You've just talked about your cinematographer, Yves Cap, and you worked with him previously on April's Daughter and Chronic. And April's Daughter, again, was a film that prioritized different points of view. How did you begin collaborating with Cap? Because, of course, he's worked with Bruno Dumont, Claire Denis, Cedric Kahn, Patrice Chéreau. Tell us how you began working with him and why you chose him to work on Chronic and have remained working with him since then.
It's my usual cinematographer, Chuy Chavez, who I still want to work with, Mexican, was not available for Chronic. He was busy. So I shooting Chronic was complicated in terms of how do I make sure that it's still gonna be a film of my own vision, and I'm gonna get away going to Los Angeles to make a movie and still have I didn't want to the film to be diluted by by the, I don't know. I just thought what films I like a lot, and Bruno Dumont and Leos Carax and all those, and the cinematographer Yves Cap had shot all of them, and I thought he might bring something new to my cinema as well. So I contacted him. I didn't know him. I started to find out a bit, about how he worked, and then we chat on Skype, and it was a gamble to fly him to Los Angeles. And then it was funny because once we started talking about how we were gonna shoot, I wanted something different, and he wanted to do what he liked about my movies. He was like, no, this is a Michel Franco movie, so let's not move the camera. Let's, do it like Lucia, like. And it was funny because I told him I brought you in for the contrary, for the opposite. I want something new. But that again brings me back to a filmmaker should never say, I want to make an ambitious movie, I want to make a different movie. I think you should understand why you're doing what you're doing, and then just shoot it.
I mean, and you prioritize in New Order different perspectives, which I think is very unsettling for the viewer. And tell me a little bit, and one of the things that emerges from that is as a non-idealization of the revolutionaries, the idea that the revolution doesn't lead to a better world. Tell us about the negotiation of those different points of view.
It was only worth making a study on a big scale if it would try to show as many aspects as possible from social scale and the politician's point of view and the military point of view, and so I decided to do it through a family, a wedding, and the people who work for the family, and to try to understand quickly the dynamics between these people, but to then see how it breaks throughout the second part of the movie, the second half of the movie. It was a matter also, first, writing was complicated, and I had a much longer script that dealt with flashbacks and other stuff, trying to explain a bit more and then I decided to trust the audience, and the film should relate to a worldwide feeling of how wrong we're living, and how wealth is held by a small percentage, and how inequities everywhere, not only in Latin America. So I said, I gotta trust the audience. I'm gonna, this character should symbolize a lot, and should, with little time on screen, the actors are gonna have to really say a lot with little resources. It was a gamble, I guess, because my other movies are the opposite. You spend a lot of time with each character, and some shots are 4 minutes just there with the camera in a room. So you breathe, you live with them. And this is always shifting from a character to the next. I'm skipping from one subject matter to the other. I don't even know what you asked at the beginning.
It was about your different points of view, which I think your answer has captured incredibly well, the ways in which this film really does bring them to the fore. Did you shoot it in chronological order? Because with your previous films, you've largely shot in chronological order, and you often reshoot scenes. I remember once you telling me that with Chronic, you'd reshot 30% of the scenes for the film.
It was the same in this case. I developed this system, and it's so far working for me. So I wouldn't give it up. Like, for example, if I shoot another film in the States, Chronic, I produced Chronic with Gabriel Ripstein, so we were able to do that. But if I ever shoot another film in the States, it has to be, or any other place, it has to be done in the same way. I like the possibility of reshooting, and I like shooting chronologically. When we shot April's Daughter, the owner of the equipment, the film equipment, the big trucks, was very not happy with me sending back and forth the trucks. And he said, why don't you just shoot it, like movies are done? And I said, because I don't know. I didn't go to film school. I don't know how to shoot that way. I like going chronologically. I have the editor on set. So we're reshooting everything. That it's not because we got it wrong. It's because we realized it could be better or more interesting. So the lunch break every day I spend it with the editor, and since it's chronological, we can see, 20, 30, 40 minutes. You start to discover the film. Of course, that later will change. This Nuevo Orden was a year of editing, so whatever we finished on set changed, of course, throughout a year of hard work.
And how finished was the film before COVID hit? I mean, did it delay completion? What was the impact of COVID on the film? On finishing?
It helped the movie in terms of I thought the editing was done, and I was ready to rush into post-production. The BFX had been working for months, several months in Paris, because my cinematographer is based in Paris, so he was pretty much in charge of all that technical and creative aspect of the movie. So it gave more time to the visual effects, but mainly it was important that I kept editing. My sister, who you mentioned, I co-directed a movie with her. She's the one who understands better what I want to do and how my movies can be improved. And the editor and I, we were sure that we were done. And she said, you got it wrong in many parts because it's over edited. You're thinking too much, and you gotta go back and edit from the gut. And she was right. So COVID helped in that way. And there was a lockdown in Mexico, but I never stopped working because the editor and I could, just two people in a room. So that was good. I'm glad we went to Venice and the film arrived to its final form.
I mean, my colleague Jonathan Romney, when he saw the film in Venice, described it as having the dystopian lucidity of G. Ballard and the icy rigor of Michael Haneke. I mean, it's not the first time your work has been compared to Michael Haneke.
Yeah, and of course I'm always flattered because he's a fantastic filmmaker. I think I like him and Lars von Trier and many other directors, but those two to me are giants of our times. I like Nurit Bilge Ceylan, and I like Pedro Costa, and I like but my cinema might be closer somehow. So then again, it's my sixth movie, and I could understand how my previous work was compared to Haneke, but I don't think New Order is similar to any movie altogether, and I like that. I'm proud about that. And even I and my production designer, we're not working from references, or this was really a gamble, and we really didn't know what we were doing, so to speak.
I mean, I think one of the strengths of the film is a characteristic of all your filmmaking, which is the way in which you show but you don't tell. And by that I mean the wedding scene is for me a wonderful lesson in how you're able to portray the whole culture of bribes and corruption in those upper echelons of Mexican society, just by stuff that is absolutely normal, that they think that the wedding is a space to be doing those deals. I mean, it's a wonderful way of showing how corruption underpins the whole society. But I think that's a characteristic of all your work, the showing rather than the telling.
The corruption and the way these people behave, and the way classism and racism and every other thing that I wanted to shoot it like almost taking it for granted, like as if it's a natural thing, because in Mexico it's the daily bread. So we don't even see how wrong it is that we're living. But again, not only in Mexico, it's not a coincidence that Parasites and Joker came out. I had already finished my movie and those came out. I think everybody understands these things. So with small gestures and trusting the audience, you can achieve a lot, and that's why I hate this TV series bullshit that is entirely anti-cinematic, because when people explain you why series are great, they tell you because you have a lot of time to understand the characters, and that's bullshit. Cinema is about saying a lot without words or with little resources, and you know, I that I want to keep working that way, and it doesn't mean I wouldn't do TV one day or whatever, but it's beautiful to try to say a lot with little and to trust the audience.
I mean, I remember years ago when we were talking about After Lucia, you mentioned, I never try and explain everything in my films. And again, I think that's a characteristic that runs through all your filmmaking, that you let mystery remain. There are things we will never know as a viewer. And I think your films are all the richer for it.
And again, how much damage Save the Cat and all those silly books have made to cinema. And the fact that every filmmaker, not every filmmaker, of course, but most filmmakers from most countries are trying to be Hollywood, and the rules are within the first 5 minutes of the movie, everything has to be clear. Who's good, who's bad, what are the goals? Jesus, let's not even, waste people's time if it's gonna be like that.
Tell me about where you start with a film because you're an incredibly accomplished screenwriter and you take responsibility for the screenplays of your film. Do you begin with a theme? Do you begin with a character? You often write with particular actors in mind.
Well, every movie is a bit different. Most of my movies begin from personal experiences, which doesn't mean they are biographical. It just means that there's a feeling or an interest, an obsession, a fear that I need to explore, and I write a movie about that. New Order was different. New Order is also personal because since I was a kid, I knew it was wrong. The way we're living is wrong, and when you're a 6-year-old, you ask, but why are people without the basic things that we enjoy, and why are we living a privileged life, and you drive 10 minutes within the city and you are suddenly in a place that is clearly not, things are not right for these people. And growing up apparently means that's the way it is. Nothing can be changed. Yeah, it's sad, but come on, enjoy life. That's what you keep hearing. What I kept hearing when I was growing up, and I think that it's the same everywhere. This is the same everywhere. And Africa, for example, a whole continent completely forgotten. The world simply won't. Let's just forget Africa exists. That's the solution people offer, and it's heartbreaking. In this way, New Order is, of course, very personal too. And I belong to that privileged Mexican society, clearly. And I wanted to portray that and how it's wrong in so many levels. I wanted to portray that in a movie.
Tell me let's move to the beginning of your filmmaking career and your first feature, Daniel and Anna, where I think we see the signature style of your first 4 films, the static observational camera, the sparse dialogue, a real, for me, a cinema of austerity, only diegetic music. Were you really clear when you were conceiving that film that was the aesthetic, the style that you wanted to go with to tell that story?
It all began. My last short film from 2003 was handheld, and that was my last cinematic experience. And 5 years later, I had to shoot the script I wrote for Daniel and Anna, and I didn't know how to shoot it, but I did know that what I wanted to avoid. And I was growing up in Mexico, melodrama is a big thing, not only in TV, but also in movies. And I knew I didn't want it to go there. So I said, I thought with my cinematographer, if we keep the camera away and we're not using film language in the classical way, and we're not, you know, cutting to the close-up and explaining everything. And if we're not using music to everything that wasn't achieved by the actors or the camera, you know, just explain it with the music. I just thought I'm gonna make my first movie, and I want it to outstand. I want to gamble, and if it's a terrible movie, you know, I'll live with that. But I don't want to make a mediocre movie, because how many first-time directors are working every year, and somehow you gotta. It's hard to make a movie, and I shot that in 35 millimeters, and it's always expensive. So you gotta use that to make something strong, not just another movie. And again, I was already obsessed. My favorite film book is Bresson's Notes on Cinematography, or whatever it's called in English, and he insists about, you know, how tricks shouldn't be used, and how you can find something truthful in cinema if you don't go to the obvious places. And I think I was somehow trying to do that with Daniel and Anna.
Tell me about the story for Daniel and Anna, because it's based on events that happen with these forced kidnappings in Mexico. So tell me about the point of origin for the film. It's an incredibly disturbing tale in many ways, of a brother and sister that are forced to have sex together when they're kidnapped.
The story came to me, arrived to me through the therapist that treated the real case, and the person the brothers, the siblings that went through this experience, wanted their story to be portrayed, because somehow it would be cathartic. I never met them, but it was through the therapist. To me, it was a good mix of an intimate story, a portrayal of characters that I know well, because it's, again, Mexicans that live in a certain way. And I like the family dynamics on the story, because things will not be talked through, and even though characters love each other, everything gets more complicated. And of course, it talks about violence in Mexico, which I insist, it's our daily bread. So that's why I thought that was going to be my first movie. And I knew it had a certain power, because first they're forced to have sex, but that's not the climax of the movie. The point of interest is what they do with that, you know, afterwards.
And I think that's one of the strengths of the film, is the way you deal with the consequences of that act on the siblings, and how they have to renegotiate their relationship. I love the width that you use in terms of the screen, which for me accentuates the isolation of the characters, the gulf between them.
I didn't know what I was doing. I was working from my instinct. And then I was surprised when I wrote Después de Lucia about how similar the scripts. There are very different movies, but again, people were not communicating with each other. And those two movies work in a very simple way. If they could simply talk to each other, the characters, everything could be avoided. But that's how we live. We're supposed to be clever, educated people, sophisticated, and we keep not being able to talk with our children, with our partners. And I'm fascinated by this lack of capacity to simply, you know, live and express ourselves. And I think cinema is, the screen's a good medium to explore this without having to explain it.
You've just mentioned Después de Lucia, After Lucia, and this was your first feature as producer. What made you turn to becoming a producer on your films, and what's that given you? Freedom, I presume, but tell us, control, freedom?
Yes, control and freedom, absolutely. But it was quite simple. My first movie was a great experience with the actors and with the cinematographer and with the editor, we didn't edit 3 movies in between, but now we're working together again. But every other aspect from the movie was a horrible experience. Was extremely complicated. We had a huge crew, so money was being wasted on things that were not on screen. I wasn't allowed to shoot chronologically. What I just said, I wasn't allowed. I had to keep asking for permission and excusing myself and explaining to someone else. And I think the film works, Daniel and Ana. I'm proud of it. And it's a decent debut movie. But I knew that if I kept doing movies that way, I wouldn't go far. And it was painful. It was painful, a horrible experience. And people kept the crew was good. Like the people that were close to me were good, but the bigger scale was terrible. So anyhow, I realized even with a smaller budget, I rather rely on my own. I rather blame myself if things are not working than having to be on the phone with someone. I don't like asking for permission, and well, I'm repeating myself, but that's why I became my own producer. And Después de Lucia, we shot it with a tiny budget, but nevertheless we shot 9 weeks. I reshot this system of reshooting. I developed it there. Well, actually, I developed it with A Los Ojos, co-directing with my sister that movie. That's where I really learned how to make my movies through the eyes, A Los Ojos. But it was a year and a half of shooting through the eyes because it's half documentary, half so it's different. Después de Lucia was a regular shooting, only done with little money, but still I reshot everything I want. I did everything I wanted. So I learned that, and it's my most successful film. I mean, probably New Order will be more explosive than that. It's proving to be more than Lucia, but it even turned into a commercial movie, so to speak, because in Mexico it sold 1 million entries. So I shot a movie with a tiny budget. We shot it with a 7D camera, that photo camera, and nobody cared about the technical aspects. People were just moved by what was portrayed on screen. So after that I even started producing movies for other directors because it became it's cinema works that way. It went from nobody believing in me and nobody listening to me and having to work with tiny budget to a lot of trust and to a lot more attention. So that was very satisfying.
I'm going to return to your work as a producer later, but tell me about, I mean, you've talked about the success of After Lucia. For me, the performances are just extraordinary. Tessa Ia as Alejandra and Hernan Mendoza as Roberto, her father. Rarely have I seen such a fabulous portrait of grief. His grief numbs him, and there's something about what he can't articulate, what he can't say. So tell me a little bit about the casting, because I think they're both extraordinary in the film.
It was, I agree with you. I think they're great. It was pretty much the first movie of both of them. Hernan is now after that movie he became a film actor, but before that he worked on stage. He was one of the most respected on stage actors, but I don't know if because of his physics or he worked on TV too, just to make a living, but like in soap operas, in telenovelas. And somebody, the actress mother told me, because again, the part was rejected by important Mexican actors. So she told me, you should see this guy on stage. So we went to see him and I was fascinated. And I just gave him the role immediately. I gave him the script and said, if you want the role, it's yours. There's no need for casting or anything. And the first few days of shooting, he came from stage, so it was hard. I told him, you're gonna hate me because I keep saying don't do this, don't do that, like restraining him, but at the same time telling him you gotta trust the camera, and you all those emotions will, trust yourself and trust. And he was not annoyed, the opposite. He liked the amount of attention that I was giving to every small detail. And Tim Roth, when he saw the movie and gave us the award in Cannes, the first thing he asked is, "Who's that man? Like, who's that actor?" Because he thought, he's like a star or something. Not a star, like a huge. He must be a huge actor in Mexico. He was totally unknown. And for Tess, I wrote the part. She's the sister of Nayan, of the lead of New Order. They're sisters. So again, I know Tessa since she was very young. And I wrote the part specifically for her, and I kept asking questions about, would teenagers do this or not? How do you talk to your friends? All the bullies, everyone that's bullying her on the movie, they're her real friends in life. So a lot of improvisation, a lot of playing around with real feelings, and that, I think that's why it works.
I think that's another wonderful part of the film, is the way you portray that teenage world where the adult presence is minimal. They police themselves. They're in a little bubble, and that, I mean, that works beautifully. It's wonderfully nuanced in the film, and you what it leads to in this case is almost a Lord of the Flies situation.
Yeah, people mentioned that movie too, which I'm flattered about. I guess I wanted to make a study about martyrdom. You say it that way. What would the girl do to, in her mind, help the depressed father? And of course, she makes a lot of mistakes. And that took me to wanting to make a study of teenagers, the way they relate. Because something I wasn't entirely satisfied with Daniel and Anna was, I think it's a little, I could have gone deeper into the teenage world. So in Daniel and in Después de Lucia, I was determined to go, really into it. So I think it works as a study of these dynamics. People tend to describe it as a film about bullying, but bullying only begins halfway through into the movie. It should be about many things, about grief mainly, and about the lack of communication, but it should really be a study of teenagers too. And I like what the kids did on screen.
How do you work with actors, Michel? Because you were talking about the importance of A los ojos, through the eyes, which you worked with your sister, Victoria. And that film, like New Order, features Mónica del Carmen, who was an actress who also was primarily known as a stage actress before you cast her in Through the Eyes. So tell me about how you work with actors, because again, hers is a terrific performance. And again, you have children in that film, slightly younger, on the cusp of the teenage years, moving into the teenage years. Tell me about that film.
Mónica del Carmen, I saw her on Leap Year, and she's the actress in most of my movies. She's in New Order too, of course. So she's my favorite actor, so to speak. I keep going back to her. Even when she's not on screen, she's helping me to find non-actors. I like mixing actors and non-actors, but the way I work with actors, it's very straightforward. I don't believe in this manipulation, or some directors tend to say, I'm gonna break this actor, I'm gonna take him where he's not comfortable, and then I'm gonna do. I don't believe in those things. I like to be first, if there's a good script, that it's a good point of departure. But then I like to talk with them and listen to them and be respectful. And it's the same directing a 5-year-old kid than a very accomplished actor. Then of course they have to be humble as well. And we need to be able to get lost within the process and to find again. I'm a director that's never afraid to say on set, this is not working, this is poorly written, I'm not satisfied, I don't know how to do it. So I'm not pretending to know everything. And of course I believe it's a matter of, film is a collective effort. So with actors, I'm very straightforward. And I don't direct in a different way. For example, a complicated sexual scene, or it's tricky because then people think that the smaller scenes, those are easy to shoot, and sometimes those are a lot more complicated. So every scene is treated with the same amount of concentration. Of course, if I'm shooting a sex scene, I'm careful to have a close environment and all that. And actors trust me to a great extent. For example, in New Order, the opening scene where Nayan is covered in green paint and she's naked pretty much on the street, that was not on the script. Not the fact that she was naked. And talking with the cinematographer, we said, that would be fantastic, but will she agree? It took 3 minutes for her to say, if you think we need it, then go ahead. So it's all about trust. It's all, and they need to open themselves up. And I like working with the same actors time and again. Whenever I'm asked, who do you want to work with? I just want to go back to my actors, and of course to discover new ones. But I like the fact that it's a family.
And what role does improvisation play in terms of you bring a screenplay? Was the screenplay very different for something like Through the Eyes, where you're working with your sister, to something like Chronic, for example? Tell us about the differences between, do you have different, or is it a similar, do you still leave a degree of freedom for the development of the screenplay through the filming process?
Through the Eyes was done with treatment, a 3-page treatment. There was no script, because the whole idea of that movie is not imposing to homeless people in Mexico City, of course, just to understand how they live. Again, to make a study of homeless people through the look of Mónica del Carmen's character, who's a social worker. So Mónica was committed to the role, to the job, without being paid, because we did that movie, with nothing, really with nothing. She became a real social worker. And my sister and Mónica went 6 months to the streets to start, so people would get used to them. They were spending 8-10 hours, first only talking, then recording. I don't have that kind of patience. I think I will never do a documentary myself. But once my sister had done all that hard work and recorded a huge amount of material, I shaped the fictional part of it with Benjamin, the lead actor, who's not an actor. He was homeless when we met, and the whole process of rehab that he goes through in the story, he went through for real. The whole detox process, and it was all done with Casa Alianza, which is an institution that has been around for, 30-40 years, helping out homeless people. So it's I think it's my most special movie. It's a shame that it's the one that people have seen less. But I took to an extreme the everything has to be real. And I'm very fond of that movie. Because of my poor decisions on letting it go and accepting certain invitations and not others, I take the blame on the fact that it's not. It didn't receive a wider release, but I think people will find it throughout time. I was always hoping to have a more successful movie, which now might be New Order, because then people will also probably look back into my other movies, and that would be great, because every movie has been, especially that one, such a hard task.
And you talked about learning a lot about filmmaking when making that film. What was the relationship with your sister like when you were filming? Did you take a different role? How did you negotiate the co-direction? Or was it that she took responsibility for the more documentary aspects and you for the work with the actors in developing the narrative?
It was like that, but having said that, of course you would speak her mind every time something wasn't working. Monica and Victoria, my sister, are very, very close. I think we did everything together, although she did the documentary part on her own. But the rest we did together. I was a little bit more experienced, so I knew a little bit better how to frame a scene and try to make what I did later in Lucia and Chronic, to work with the actors within the frame and the composition and all that. But I still, my sister is uncredited on my, in New Order she's credited as casting director along with Viridiana. That's not accurate exactly. She kept on bringing, because New Order is such a, the cast is huge. We needed, and my sister was obsessed about every actor or non-actor should be right for every smaller part. Otherwise, this won't work. So even in the warehouse, every kidnapped character was carefully picked by my sister. So I wouldn't know how to describe in a conventional way the way we work together. And I produce short films for her, and she's now writing her first feature, and I want to produce that, of course.
Let's move on to Chronic. I think for me, one of the things I found so extraordinary about Chronic is the performance of Tim Roth, but also his singular sense of purpose. And I think that's something he shares in common with Monica in Through Her Eyes. I mean, they're driven by a very particular thing that isn't always clearly articulated and that we find out about much later in the film. Tell me about making Chronic, because obviously it was a project that you were thinking about and then took a very different direction when you met Tim Roth in Cannes.
I wrote Chronic because the caregiver that was with my grandmother after she suffered a brain stroke and took care of her for 6 months. You know, I was fascinated by her and the relationship, so I wrote Chronic. When I met Tim, I told him, he asked, what's the next movie? I said, it's a nurse, a female character in Mexico, and she's, you know, I told him the whole story. He said, turn it into a man and I'll do it, which I never, for me, it was, like you said, very close to Through the Eyes. Through the Eyes is a social worker. This was a caregiver. And it was supposed to be, you know, an intimate, smaller movie in Mexico. But Tim went nuts about Lucia, and he really wanted to work with me. And of course, you know, I got excited about the idea because I love his work. And I realized from a male perspective, the story could be even more interesting because it's not the obvious take. So I rewrote the script for Tim, and we had long chats about it. And he had a lot to say about the script. So many pages were perfect, but some other things he said, I would like this and that, and his instinct was right. So we collaborated in a great way. That script was crafted. There was no improvisation at all, or very little. The only improvisation was when Tim worked as a caregiver, like Monica did as a social worker, for several months. He went through the experience. So often he was able to explain to me the technical aspect of a caregiver or certain ideas. And so the cinematographer and I, we knew exactly how we wanted to place the camera and how to shoot. But Tim was very much in charge of his character. And there are some stories about how much I directed him, you know, very punctually, but in many, many scenes, he was just, you know, doing what he thought was best, and it worked. I don't like directing actors that much. I like hiring actors and letting them do their thing. And if we need to work together, we will, but I respect actors, and I want to see what they propose before I impose my vision. It was a great experience with Tim. Tim would always be sitting at the entrance of the location, each house we were shooting on, and he would arrive before he would arrive earlier to his call, and I was like, Jesus, Tim's sitting there again. I need a lot to figure out. It's not just his character. And Tim would be like, no, let's sit down. We need to talk about what we're shooting. We need to talk. And I thank him for that, because I didn't get lost in any technical aspect of the movie. I was close to Tim, and we really made the film together. And my cinematographer was taking care of the other aspects. So I rely heavily on people, as you can see. I don't pretend to know everything. I hate that approach on cinema.
But I think, you know, one of the things for me, again, that I see lots of similarities between Chronic and Through Her Eyes is that they're both films that are unafraid to ask questions of the moral choices the characters make and the consequences of the situations that they find themselves in. And that makes for complex, interesting cinema.
Yes. In life, it's always clear what's right and wrong. But then when fiction is treated in a simple way, it's not interesting. And I like the gray area. I like facing the audience with what would you do in that situation. For example, when Tim's character in Chronic helps Marta because she wants to end her life because she's a terminally ill patient, he knows he agrees with her and he wants to help her, but that doesn't mean it's not painful, and it triggers it brings back his personal traumatic experiences. But I don't want to explain it. I want the audience to go through it with him. And in Through the Eyes is even worse because the character has to betray she's a social worker and she's supposed to help people, but when her own child needs a solution so he won't lose his sight, she makes something terribly wrong. But what would people do? You know, honestly, what would people do? I like facing people and facing myself with the ultimate difficult decisions that one eventually will have to make in life.
When I saw Chronic, it made me think about Ingmar Bergman, and I do think it's a film for me that really crystallized the relationship I think your cinema has to Bergman's cinema. You also mentioned Bresson, and again, I think there's something in the leanness of your work that reminds me of Bresson. Have both of those been formative influences on you?
Well, I'm thanks for saying that, but of course I would put myself a million miles away from those masters. But yeah, to me, Bergman and Bresson are two of the best, absolutely. And I like Buñuel a lot too, but I don't think my filmmaking has a lot to do with Buñuel, unfortunately.
Oh, maybe New Order. Maybe New Order.
Maybe New Order. Yeah.
Buñuelian film, I think, is New Order.
It's been said a bit. It's true. With Viridian and Discreet Charm, maybe. I don't take myself too seriously. I think the minute a filmmaker believes, you know, if I think I'm great, and if I assume that I know what I'm doing, I think that then I'm lost immediately. And I thought about New Order for 6 years. Chronic was a long process too. Chronic, my grandmother passed in 2010, and I finally shot it in 2014. And I made Through the Eyes and Después de Lucia in between. So I was really into others. But I think once it's time to okay, I'll go get into the next movie, I have to dive into it. And I don't think about my previous work. I don't think about references. But I've seen not every Bergman movie, but almost all of them a few times. And I'm obsessed with Bergman. I think the insight he had about human behavior and the human soul, but at the same time being deeply cinematic, simple and profound. I mean, he's the ultimate master, of course, Bergman.
So how did you, I mean, you talked about not going to film school, but you made a number of shorts, you made commercials. Is that how you honed your craft? You talked about the importance of reading Bresson's work. Are you a filmmaker that in effect learnt your craft by doing?
I don't believe in film school anyhow. That doesn't mean film schools shouldn't exist, because they work for some people. I would have liked to go to film school when I was younger, but when I shot my first film, 8 movies were done per year in Mexico. So my father was very concerned about, you know, the obvious, how will you make a living? So advertisements seem to be the solution to not be too far from what I really wanted to do. Of course, I hated advertisement. I mean, by watching my movies, you can, there's no further, but that was good too, because I was so fed up of 6-7 years of doing commercial stuff that I said, okay, finally I get to do my own stuff. So I took it as far further from commercial world as I could, in terms of the grammatics of cinema and so on. But I think nobody can teach you to be a director, and especially to be a writer. I think if you're truly obsessed with film, and if it's your only, film becomes a way of living for me. I don't know if it sounds depressing or interesting. It depends on how much you understand these obsessions. But every, you know, for example, I was kidnapped once in Mexico, express kidnap, they call it. So I was held for 7 hours going to ATMs. It's a fun story if I would tell you the details, and it's a horror at the same time. I was 21. I was already making short films. And first, of course, I panicked, and because I thought I was gonna die. And the only way to calm myself and to not lose my mind was pay attention to every detail, listen. They wouldn't let me see, but, you know, try to remember everything that's happening, because you will use this for your writing someday, even if it's not a, again, I'm not working on a autobiographical. I didn't shot a movie about that, but maybe for Daniel and Anne it helped, and maybe for New Order it helped. So every, you know, living for me is always material for work. And but I think that's the way writers work too, like you know, novelists. Philip Roth is one of my favorite writers. Everything has to do with his world and himself, and I think that's the difference between serious filmmaking and just bullshit non-important filmmaking. I'm not saying mine is important. I'm just saying the right approach. Sometimes I talk to big directors, friends of mine who are accomplished Hollywood big directors with huge houses in Los Angeles and so on, and they tell me, you know, they complain about how they don't have full freedom to work, and they tell me, wouldn't you like to make at least one masterpiece? When will I make my Bicycle Thief? They ask, you know, and I said, you never, man, because you're making movies that are $60 or $100 million with you know. Of course that's not gonna happen, but if you take film as a personal thing, and that's, I'll just finish by saying, nobody can teach you that.
After Chronic, were you not tempted to make more work in English? Because your film After Chronic, April's Daughter, was shot, you went back to Mexico and you made it in Mexico. Did you ever think about it as an English language, potentially as an English language film?
I did, but I hate meetings and pitching, and I was not, you know, and I still don't want to go through that ever if I can avoid it. And Los Angeles, it's all about meetings and meetings and meetings, and you feel that you accomplish something by, I had a great meeting. So I'm not into that. And in Mexico I can control things a lot more. There are certain actors that I really want to work with in the States, or British actors, and I will, I'm sure, but it has to be on my terms. I have to be in control, and so whenever that opportunity comes again. Chronic was all done with Mexican money, and Gabriel Ripse and I were the producers. So yeah, why not shoot again in Los Angeles? Having said all this, and going back to the directors I admire the most, they made the best work in their own countries. Kieślowski went to France and still made fantastic movies. Of course you can do it, you can pull it off, and of course many European directors went to the States to do some of, you know, fine work, and Mexican directors. But it's already hard to write something good in my own country after, when I'm asked what was the research for New Order, just living there 41 years. So that's already hard. I wouldn't want to be a foreigner and on top of that, try to do something truthful.
With April's Daughter, you cast Emma Suarez as the mother, as April. Were you always, did you always want an outsider to play that role? Because there's something about her as an outsider in the film that I think works really well in terms of the feminine dynamic created between the mother and the daughters, that you take in very unsettling different directions through the film.
No, I think Emma Suarez did a fantastic job. I had seen her movies, but when the idea came to my head was after watching Julieta. But the real story, it's very silly. I went to a Mexican actress, slightly older, that hasn't done great work in a long time, but was good before. And I thought, I'll give her the role and it's going to be a comeback for her. And it was funny. She read the script and she thought it was terrible and she wasn't interested. And I think there's still a thing sometimes when a director, since I didn't go to film school and so on, I think strangely enough, some people didn't want to believe, I don't know, whatever. So I was angry and I said, who's the best actress in the whole world, Spanish speaking? I don't mind if I bring someone from Argentina or and Emma Suarez from Julieta. I thought if she was good enough for Almodovar. And with Emma was the opposite. She read the script 6 hours, I sent her and 6 hours later she was telling me how great it was and signing in for the role. And I'm grateful to her because she was very humble. She's a fantastic actress and we remain close friends. And Ana Valeria, one of the daughters, the main actress in the movie, it was her first movie, 19 years old. And Joanna Larecki, the other daughter, also, she's not like a star in Mexico. She's a fantastic stage actress. And they became a family. I don't rehearse. We just read the script. But a week before shooting, I put them in the house where we shot most of the movie in Puerto Vallarta. And without any production assistance or anything, they just lived there. We gave them the car that was going to be used throughout the movie. So, they went out and buy groceries and they got drunk together and they became a family. So when I went back a week later to shoot, they would sometimes improvise some dialogue and cut. That was good, but just out of curiosity, why did you say that? Oh, you don't know, but our characters lived, 6 years ago, this happened to us. Okay, fantastic.
I think the film, I love the ending to the film as well, but I always think your films take the viewer in an extraordinary direction at the end of the film. You often surprise us, you unnerve us, you unsettle us at the end of the film with the decisions that your characters make, knowingly or unknowingly. And that's the case in After Lucia, it's the case in April's Daughter, it's the case in Chronic, and it's the case in New Order as well.
Well, endings are important because that's what the audience walks away with. The whole film, but the ending has to make an impact. That doesn't mean it has to be fireworks. I often do fireworks. I don't know. I like knowing what the ending of a movie is when I'm writing. Not necessarily at the beginning of the process, but early on the process, because that's what gives meaning to the whole movie. So yes, people talk a lot about the ending of Lucia, for example. The end of April's Daughter is a bit different, right? Because there's hope at the end. The daughter, I won't spoil it if someone hasn't seen it, but there's hope at the end of April's Daughter.
we've come to the end of the interview, but before we finish, I'd like to just ask you two very brief things. You've talked about Gabriel Ripstein, and obviously he was involved in Chronic, translating the screenplay for you in English, and you produced his film 600 Miles. You've also produced Lorenzo Vigas's From Afar, a Golden Lion winner in Venice. The same year as Ripstein premiered 600 Miles in Berlin. And last year, of course, we had David Zonana's Workforce that we screened here at the London Film Festival. So your work as a producer, tell us a little bit about the importance of that to you. And finally, what's next for you, Michel, in terms of After New Order?
It's we're a group of friends. We've been talking about cinema for 20 years, Gabriel, Lorenzo Vigas, and I. So it's not like I'm the producer at all. They knew a lot more about cinema when we met because I was much younger. I was just more radical and more, hungry or more afraid of not being able to become a filmmaker. So I was, shooting one thing after the next and so on. So with the success of Lucia, it was easy to shoot Chronic, to find the money, and Tim signed in and everything we talked about. But also financing became a little bit easier for a limited extent of time. Then it was complicated again. But I used that window to produce with these friends. I'm not a producer that will read scripts. I never read scripts that are sent by someone I don't know, because shooting a film with someone, it's a very intimate process. So I only do it with close friends, and my role as a producer is just what they do when they produce for me. I help them out to make a better movie. So it's a very horizontal, so to speak, relationship where we depart from the fact that the director is always right and has the last word. So we do whatever he needs. With David Sonan, it was slightly different, of course, because he's way younger than I, and he was my assistant for years. So it's a different thing. But again, with David, I was never on set. I visited, I told him, this is your movie, so good luck. And I'm here if you need me. And I gave him many, many notes on the script and many more on the editing. And he would reshoot things up after our chats. So I would kind of guide them. But it's, I'm not many producers truly believe in the fact that film is a director's media, and not it's not show business or any bullshit like that. And it's not about all your previous experience. It's about understanding what every movie needs particularly. So you cannot impose a production system into a movie, and you cannot force a director into anything he doesn't believe in.
And what's next, Michel? What comes after New Order for you?
I got something, but I won't tell you what it is.
Well, then we'll have to invite you back to the London Film Festival so you can show it to us and tell us about it next time. Michel Franco, thank you so very, very much.
Thank you so much. And I'm glad that people will be entertained by our chat, and hopefully they will watch the movies they haven't seen of my work. Thank you so much. See you next year.